just reminded me that it is, if I'm not mistaken, 4:30 a.m. And a warm welcome to Deborah for getting up so early in the morning to speak at SAPEX. So a little bit about Deborah. She's a supply chain enthusiast, working through executive levels in complex stakeholder and systems environments, demonstrating strong strategy and well-managed execution. She believes that supply chains play a critical role in achieving business outcomes, and each supply chain has the potential to be phenomenal. Deborah promoted the use of new technology to propel frontier markets on behalf of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In her current role, Deborah is working across the supply chain community to accelerate the transition to a circular economy, and is hoping to inspire the SAPEX community on the power of supply chain and better business outcomes. So without any more ado, over to you, Deborah.
Thanks, Colin, and good afternoon, but good morning from me. Really excited to share these thoughts with you today. So when thinking about circularity and framing it as a strategy for you, we all have a strategy. We have a way from here to there. And in supply chain, of course, we add value to our organizations. Basically, we can go faster, we can cost less, or we can be better, higher quality, better service level, and so on. But supply chains are complex. We have a lot of moving parts, and those parts have moving parts. And all of those parts come from somewhere. And all of these parts, of course, can be disrupted. And this disruption earlier this year happened for all of us. Consumers saw this, we saw this, and somehow we also had this, understock and overstock at the same time. In the time we have together today, let's explore how we can use circular supply chain as anecdotes to the disruption we feel. We'll also look at what is a circular supply chain and how to get started. Throughout all of this, I'm going to ask you to do something kind of unique. I'm going to ask you to keep your phone or an internet browser handy because I'm going to be asking you questions. All right, let's start with what is a circular supply chain. But to do that, of course, we need to answer what is a circular economy. Very simply put, a circular economy gets the most possible value out of every material and resource in it. Now, this is in contrast to today's economy, which is called a linear economy, and it works like this. You take something from the planet, we make something super efficiently, and when we're done, typically items go to landfill. The issue with this is that these items sent to landfill could have added more value to the global economy. And of course, in some cases, they don't end up in landfill at all. They end up all the way down here and all the way up here. Now, there's 3 issues with the linear economy that I'll share with you right now. And of course, there's more than 3, but I'll share these 3 with you. First, something called fugitive value. So the idea here is we're saying, look, in a circular economy, everything has value. Every material has value to give. The challenge is when these materials aren't where we want them to be. They're escaping the value chain and they become fugitive. So this is issue 1, that materials have more to give to the global economy. $4.5 trillion more, actually, if we were to switch to a circular economy. Issue number 2 is that prices are going up for commodities. So this is a graph of commodity prices over time, starting in 1900 up until about 10 years ago. We can see this nice steady downfall as we've applied lean manufacturing and technology has improved, and we've moved through the second into the third, now the fourth industrial revolution. But the last 20 years, as you can see, the prices are really starting to go up. And this is because we're actually running out. This is a bit fuzzy, but you can see it's the periodic table. The darkest color there, we've got less than 50 years remaining known in the planet. And I've translated some of these If it's been a bit like you have, like for me, since you've seen a periodic table. So this is the second issue, is actually we're running out. So materials are becoming more scarce. And of course, circularity can help with this. We'll come back to this, but the idea here is that in a circular economy, you don't use virgin materials. You can actually reuse materials called secondary raw materials, and we can decouple how much material you need to keep your same operation running. So the third issue that I'll share today is we're back to this one, disruption. The linear economy and the way it's working today, it's making our supply chains very fragile. I'll show you what I mean here. So the lengths of these supply chains are becoming an issue. Here we have some nice diced pears. And if we look closely there, we can say packed in Thailand, see side of cup for pear origin. All right, so let's flip the cup over. Grown in Argentina, packed in Thailand, consumed in America. So these nice little pears have traveled 18,000 miles just to get to where they're meaning to be consumed. And we can do this with jeans as well. Cotton grown in Pakistan, some transformation happening in China, additional transformation in Bangladesh, and then sent to the United States. And of course, we can do this with food. This is a bit of a grainy picture, but you can see along the left side there, this is just within the United States alone. The majority of food there grown in Colorado and shipped all the way to Iowa. And at least for Americans, the average meal is traveling over 1,500 miles. So the way I put this is, this has gotten out of hand. So the issue with these long supply chains is that there's more chances along the way for us to get disrupted. So my first question for you, so get out your phones, is how much do these three different issues impact your supply chain? And how this is going to work is you're going to go to a website called menti.com, and you're going to enter this code. And I'll do this with you. Make sure it's showing here. Let me reload this really fast because this doesn't seem to be working. And present, I don't want to give you all the answers. All right, let's try this one. Menti.com, and you enter this code you see up here. Perfect, some of you are figuring this out. And you'll see three issues. Material and resources could have given more value. They are expensive, and your supply chain is long and it's getting disrupted. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to get to menti.com, enter the code that's there, 6953908. And you can vote on how much your supply chain is getting impacted by these three. Long supply chains count as a border. So if your items cross borders, if you're having trouble finding materials, or if you think, gosh, those materials really could have added more value either to our supply chain or to somebody else's supply chain before we put them in the bin. We'll give this another minute. No, but not a whole minute, maybe 8-9 seconds, and you'll have another chance to do some more of these. All right, so we see a fair amount, almost everyone have some material issues. Almost everybody has a long supply chain. I find this is very common. All right, we'll come back to this, so I'll leave it up if you want to continue to vote. All right, so now let's talk about how we can fix this. This is an example, actually that started in the 70s up in the Nordic region of Europe. And the story here is that there were different manufacturers all with the same problem. They had a material scarcity problem, fresh water. So you can see there's water, it's salt water around. They needed fresh water for their manufacturing. And so a couple of them got together and decided to co-locate and share this fresh water used in production. And it's what's called industrial symbiosis, so a symbiotic relationship among factories in this case. And so here we can see red flows are energy flows, even like heat. Water is flowing in green and materials are flowing, water's in blue, materials are in green. And if we take this concept of material exchanges and sharing and we make this regional, so not terribly large, but not necessarily co-located, we'll start to get to the concept of a circular economy. So there's 3 principles of the circular economy. These go in order. First, design waste out. This is not about designing with waste. This is about designing waste out to begin with, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Second, we're going to keep materials and resources in use as long as possible. And third, if we do this properly, we'll regenerate natural systems. So a quick example of each one. Businesses that are based on designing waste out. This will feel familiar to us. It looks like lean or Kaizen thinking. Examples might be changing product design to be modular. So we take out just the part that needs to be repaired and we don't have to bin the entire product. This might look like a sharing platform, something like Uber. So instead of selling cars, now we sell transportation, and the utilization of these items can go up. And of course, supply chain helps with this because we lean out our supply chains all the time. The second principle is based on keeping material and resources in use for as long as possible. And this is really fun because as we think about how do we keep something like this airplane engine in use, and the role of technology can really come out and shine here. So for example, at GE, which is my day job, we put about 600 sensors on an airplane engine so that we can tell from, humidity and altitude and how much everything is moving around, and apply machine learning, data science, and we can come up with prescriptive maintenance plans. So that's one way, extending the life of a resource is one business model that would fall in this principle. The last principle is businesses based on regenerating natural systems. This is the third principle, and it's tougher to get our heads around, but it's examples like biomaterials that add value upon composting. Timber could fall into that. Circular fishing and farming, switching to renewable sources of energy, reducing strain on natural lands with new sources of protein, for example, lab-grown protein or even insect-based protein. I don't know if that's taking off where you're sitting right now, but it's sure starting to take off in America. So these are the 3 principles of a circular economy, and a circular supply chain can follow the same principles. Done correctly, these principles applied together can result in more money and more security for your operations. So let's take a look now at what does a circular supply chain look like. I'll go through 5 characteristics. So a circular supply chain is lean. This should feel familiar to us. And again, the first principle of circular economy is design waste out. And we do this all the time. How do we use less material? How do we use less energy and water? How do we use fewer consumables in our operations? And I always say, if lean is about finding and eliminating waste, circularity is about finding and monetizing waste. Industrial waste in the United States alone is a $57 billion a year industry. So of course, we're doing a lot of this already. We harvest materials throughout our value chains and put them back into the value chain. Now, in circularity, this becomes common practice, and our commodities markets are filled with secondary resources instead of virgin resources out of the planet. Next, a circular supply chain is visible. After we lean it out, then the waste from one operation feeds another. And because of this, every operation becomes a source of raw material. So I have a prediction that actually no longer will data be seen as the new oil and something to hoard and keep. I think it now becomes sort of table stakes to play in the global economy. Because if we think about it, if everyone is now a source of raw material, then that means we need to be predictable for whoever it is who's going to be buying our materials. And in order to do that, of course, we need to be visible, and we need to have a better idea about where the materials are in the planet, in the economy, if we're going to use them to make new items. And I gave away the next one. A circular supply chain is predictable. So if we need to tell customers when, where, how, what quality, what quantity their materials coming in, we've got some work to do here. Now, I think this is really interesting because if we start to think about the byproduct from our operations, that defines a new customer, because value is designed by a customer. So our waste streams become value streams for a new type of customer out there. But I think this is going to get a little bit tricky, because now we have customers of our value streams and customers of our waste streams. And now we do sort of a delicate planning dance of whose order is more important. So now we have to determine production priority. Are we making for the primary or secondary customer? So I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's rather fascinating. Fourth, a circular supply chain is regional. So the whole concept here is that we harvest, transform, and use materials regionally. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but this is the idea that, we've got a lot of materials already on the planet. And for the most part, we can run an economy regionally. Now, of course, global trade is here to stay, and I'm a full supporter of that. But again, with the pears example, our use of a linear economy has gotten a little out of hand. And last, a circular supply chain is flexible. So this is, if we think about a different range of materials coming into our manufacturing plants, for example, I think instead of sticking to an exact spec, we're going to start to have a tolerance level. This is the type of material I need. It needs to be this hard. It needs to be able to conduct at this level. And we're going to start having a dynamic source of materials. So we need to start becoming quite flexible to be able to do that. We'll also need to have the ability to manufacture new builds and do remanufacturing or repair at the same time, probably on the same line. And over the next 10 years or so, we're going to have a dramatic shift from new builds to remanufacturing. Okay, so let's put these 5 together and see if we can't make some strategies out of this. We're going to look at 4 examples, and you're going to participate, so have your phones nearby. Tell me if this has ever happened to you. So this is your boss, and she comes in on a Monday morning and she says, ooh, budgets have been cut across the board. I can't find any of the things you asked me. Sorry. So has this ever happened to you? So we're going to go back to our tool here, and have you lost budget in the last year? Yes, no, or sore subject. I certainly fall into the yes. And it looks like you have 2. Ooh, somebody got quite lucky. Somebody hasn't lost budget. Sore subject, don't ask, got 1 vote here. I think this is quite common. We all have grand ideas going into a new year. Actually, we're probably doing that right now, looking into 2021. Lots of levels of uncertainty. And we're not entirely sure if our budgets will be able to be there as we get into the new year. Maybe Q2 comes around and we get this terrible message that we're not going to have the budget that we thought we would. All right, so what do we do about this? If you're running a circular supply chain, your CapEx will go down because you'll have a better handle on how to make these items that you've spent your capital expenditure funds on. You'll have them last longer. It might look like a fleet. It might look like the machines in your operations and your manufacturing, but they'll last longer because you'll have a better handle on maintenance. OpEx will go down because happily you have found a source of secondary materials and you've joined a buying group to drive market prices down, so you all save more collectively together. And OpEx comes down even more because you found a way to cut your energy bill in your factories by 30%. 2 approaches here. 1, you've changed your processes to use less energy anyway, and you've switched to renewables. And actually renewables in many markets are starting to become cheaper than traditional fuel sources. And even more, so it used to be that the waste streams coming out of your supply chain, you had to pay a disposal fee. Now you've actually found a buyer for that. So they don't pay you very much, but you're not paying to dispose of it, so that's helping. Last, the cost to create work goes down in a circular economy. I normally walk through a big slide with math on this. I'm happy to share that. But the big point is you can employ more people, and the team is very happy about that. All right, so budget's gone down, and we say, no problem. We've got a circular supply chain. Oh, my little face is on top of the little happy face there. It says problem solved. All right, next, this is your sourcing manager. He's saying the material costs are going up. Nobody seems to have enough supply. So has this happened to you this year? I'll give you a chance to answer this one as well. Have your material costs gone up in the last year? Mostly yeses, a couple of nos. There's a couple lucky people in here. Maybe not lucky. Maybe you planned extremely well and you've mitigated all of these disruptions and risks that come into your supply chain? For the most part, yes, this has happened to you this year. So now what are you going to do about it? I'll remind you of this slide. So because you're in a circular supply chain, you've dramatically reduced your reliance on virgin raw materials, that graph on the right. And instead, you have set up water sharing with nearby factories. Water can always be a little bit of a tough one. You have flexible operations. You can take different material quality and variations, and you can have more options to keep your lines up and running to produce the material in the quality levels that we need. You've also created a take-back program, so your supply chain is actually running reman on the same line as new items. And lastly, you have joined a pilot program to test an electric fleet to eliminate your dependency on petrol. Fantastic. So we're saying no problem to material costs going up. All right, third here. This is your logistics lead. She says, hey, I'm really sorry, nothing is clearing the port right now. So my question for you, have you had anything stuck in the port in the last year? Yes, no, or you have goods currently stuck right now. We had a lot of problems with this earlier this year, probably issues with it currently. A couple of you do. And I'll just give it another 5-6 seconds here. For the most part, yes, this is happening to you. All right, so what do we do about it? If you're in a circular supply chain, you have partnered with a local scrap metal producer, and you're finding just the metals that are really the most important to your operation. So you've gone through and done a risk assessment. You say, wow, I really need these 2 metals, so I'm going to make this partnership specifically for those locally so that they don't have to cross a border. You have, you don't have to give me this one. I know this is some science is needed, but you've switched your operations to using bioplastic made from local bio scraps. I just talked to somebody the other day actually in Canada who is doing something not so far from this, picking up scraps from high volume restaurants and grocery stores and really adding value back into the economy with them. And last, you've decentralized factory operations to be closer to the point of material harvest and material use. So in the next 10 years, maybe 5, I predict decentralization. So no longer this, one factory to rule them all. I think these will start to be popping up locally, kind of next to the point of reuse. And so we're saying nothing is clearing the port. That's no problem. All right, here's the last one. This is your company's sustainability leader, and she's quite chuffed because she's just announced that you've made a carbon commitment. So my last question for you on this topic is, has your company made a carbon commitment, a carbon pledge? Whether you were asked or informed about it or not, do you have one? No, but it's coming. Yes. A little bit more equal on this one. So it's starting to sweep. We just had, of course, the G20 kickoff yesterday, had some interesting carbon discussions and carbon pledges come out of that discussion. I think it was yesterday. All right, so a little bit mixed. Most people, it's on the horizon already. I predict more of us will have this to solve. So what do we do? All right. Transportation accounts for about 15% of global emissions, give or take, depending on the report. Your strategy of short regional supply chains with that electric fleet is dramatically reducing your carbon output. Congratulations. And because you're more local, you've actually nearly eliminated the need for air freight. We know that flying around the world is a huge carbon emitter. Energy is about 1/3 of carbon emissions while taken together. You've cut your energy use in your operations because you've leaned it out. You found ways to optimize machine use. You're not running pumps and off hours, et cetera, et cetera. And you've switched to renewable sources of energy, which of course, again, in some markets is getting cheaper, but in all markets is a much more carbon-friendly solution. The last one, this one's interesting to think about. You've taken a critical look at the use of AI in your supply chain. We're going through a phase here of digital transformation where everything seems to be about AI. Let's build an algorithm and apply cool math. In some cases, it actually doesn't help us that much in the results it's giving us. And here's a stat for you. Training an off-the-shelf AI language processing system, which isn't that complicated, language processing, produces about 1,400 pounds of emissions, about the same as a person flying round trip between New York and San Francisco. That's about a 6.5 hour flight. So you could, in other words, think about it from Cape Town up to, let's say, London. That's a 12-hour flight. And so it's that same emission. So one algorithm, training it alone, is the same as that flight. And this is something we don't think about very often, the impacts of the cloud, when in reality, the cloud is a physical place. Server farms are real. The more we put in the cloud, the more data we store, the more processing we do, means more servers, more spare parts, more energy, more coolant, more engineers driving out for maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. So this idea of, we'll just stick it in the cloud really does have a physical impact. All right, so we're quite happy about the position we have with carbon neutrality. So this is the last section we'll go through today. How do we even get started in this idea of turning our waste streams into value streams? And I have 7 steps, but don't worry, this will go pretty quick. The first one, of course, is where is this fugitive value, the escaped value, escaped materials? Where is this happening throughout our supply chain? And this should feel pretty familiar to us. One area that is quite interesting in talking to a supply chain the other day, sort of a gap in our traditional value stream map process. So if we think about the receiving dock of any of your processes, and we really, go to Gemba, go and see and walk the process, this may not look so bad. We're like, okay, everything is sorted out. It seems neat. But the element here that we see that we would not pick on normally is supplier packaging and pallets. And these normally wouldn't show up on our value stream map because they're not a cost to us, not directly anyway. And so one way we can start to do this is to weigh everything on the way in and the way out of our processes. And I'm including consumables, water, gas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if we can account for every last in and out kilo, now we have a pretty good idea of what's happening through our supply chain. But if there's a gap, and for the most part there is, now we can start to go and find this fugitive value. All right, then we can do what's called intensifying, which means to drive up the use of the material. So in a circular economy, any given item, we want it to be used quite often. So if I think about my clicker, I really only use this when I'm giving presentations, maybe about once or twice a week. And the other days, it's just sitting in my backpack. If we were not in the middle of a global pandemic and I was stationed in a city, I could go and borrow this. And the days I'm not using it, somebody else could use it. It's a small example, but we could apply the same thing to cars again, and to different ways of driving up use. So 3 different ways we could redesign here. We can have a different business model, switching to business as a service. We can redesign our product, I mentioned earlier, so it's modular. Or of course, we can redesign the process to eliminate waste and intensify the material use in that process. The next one is called narrowing. Now, we've talked about this before. How do we use less in our operations? Now, up to this point, everything has seemed familiar to us. I think identify, intensify, and narrow actually fall well into that lean operations. And again, I think that lean starts to get to finding and eliminating waste, and circularity gets to finding and monetizing waste. So it's kind of a 2-step process. But now we can start getting into elements that look a little bit different to us. So first, around predict. So we talked about this a little bit more earlier. We're in the middle of Industry 4.0. The sophistication of technology is quite high. The cost of sensors is quite low. And we have more data than we have ever had before. We know we have smart machines. I showed the airplane engine earlier, but we also have a concept of smart processes. This is similar to that idea of industrial symbiosis, but again, consider it regional. And if it's not within eyeshot, we can use technology to help give us some visibility. If we want to find and circulate materials, I'll use my clicker as an example again. There's a lot of plastic in this. Someday, hopefully, this will be made into another type of plastic. And in order to be forecasted, we in the supply chain need to know a lot about what exists in the world today. So we start talking about digital twins, we start talking about maps of the industrial space, and it really becomes quite complicated, and I think a really fun problem to go and solve together. All right, then we get to slow. Here's another view of that airplane engine, but in the airplane. And this, of course, is about elongating the life of any given item. This is especially helpful as we think about these very large assets that keep the world running. Like if you were to go flip on your light, you want the light to go on. There's a whole supply chain behind that. There's grids and there's production, there's storage of that energy. And again, the purpose is to make each of the machines in that value chain last as long as possible. Similarly, as consumers, we want our elements to last. We want our cell phones to last. We want our clothing to last. And those are all principles here of the circular economy. Closing the loop. This is, of course, where we take a material that no longer has value in its current form. In this case, maybe scrap metal that's come off of our production line, and we want to give it new value. In a perfect world, we could put it back into our own production. I think, this is a very large smelter here. I think we're going to have smaller micro transformation pods as we look into the future. And the last one, we have capture. This isn't talked about as much in the circular economy community, but I think it will start to be. Again, with this idea that we have these waste streams. I'll show you one. And we're able to start using that. So if I think about, for example, ocean plastics, we can have containers and leggings and clothing and all kinds of stuff made out of ocean plastic right now. But some company is going out to get that plastic and to transform it into something that a value chain can use. I think that's a new industry. I'm going to call it secondary materials as a service, and it essentially becomes a new mine that every process in the world starts to become a source of raw material. So if we want to measure these, along the left here are the newer, circular supply chain concepts that I've just walked you through. The next column is a traditional supply chain concept, which you can see, and my version of a measure of success. If you have thoughts here, I'd love to hear from you. But the idea is for each of these steps, we can start to measure. And I've set these up so that the goal for each one is 100%. So for example, that first one is an in-out ratio. As I'm thinking about what's coming in and what's going out of every operation in my supply chain, I can start to understand, do I know where the waste or the fugitive value is sitting across my value chain? We've got utilization. How do we use the items in our supply chains the highest as possible? Are we eliminating waste? Again, we've been doing that. Then we start to get into some interesting grounds. Forecast accuracy seems familiar until I tell you that what we're forecasting is the waste streams around the world. We can start to get much better about understanding how much waste is going to come out of our own operations. Version improvement to me is, let's say, life over life of a product. It should get 100% better. It should last 100% longer. Of course, this can be a philosophical debate, but I think that should be the goal. Secondary source for closed circles. So looking at all the different sources throughout your supply chain, all the different places that materials can come in, how much of that is coming from a secondary source instead of a primary source. And this last one I've called capacity. So today in a linear economy, oftentimes it's a push model and not a pull model. So we produce, and then we run specials to sell it. And one of the reasons I think this happens is because our supply chains are so long. It can take years to make an item. And so if we have such long supply chains, we have to start from scratch every single time. Certainly, we're going to end up with more of a push model. But what I'm saying here in a circular economy is, imagine an airplane engine, for example. Instead of starting from scratch, how do we maintain it forever? We don't start from scratch. We start from remanufacture and repair. And so this capacity idea is, are we making what the market needs, or are we making more than? And in this case, more than 100% would be seen as not a good idea. All right, so second to last question I have for you here is, how ready are you across these 7 elements we've just walked through? And this one, you should have a little slidey button on your phone. You can slide from nope, not ready at all, to we are experts. We could teach a course in circularity. And the first one is, of course, identifying waste. The next one is, how do we drive up usage that intensify? How do we narrow? Use less. Our first brave voter has that down. Predict waste streams, elongate the life of items, closed loop, so we're putting the scrap back into an operation, or we're using somebody else's scrap, and how well are we capturing that feedstock? And as these votes come in, we can start to see how the spread looks across. So we get the average, but we also get the different spread of votes, which I think is also rather cool. So I'll give a little bit of time on this one because there are, lots of components to this, 7 different components. So far, it's shaping up to be pretty similar. I've asked this question to lots of different audiences around different parts of the world, and it looks about like what we're showing, kind of looks like a diagonal line, where we've gotten pretty good at lean, which is those first 3-ish, and then the others are hard, and we're not quite there yet. What's really interesting here is that the analyst firm Gartner gives us till 2030 to be in circular supply chains. They've got a couple of really interesting different press releases and analyst articles about this. And the analyst firm McKinsey predicts actually 2025. And so that's only 4 years away. And what I think about a lot is, gosh, it takes 4 years just to do an ERP upgrade. And that's for existing processes with existing software. We have to come up with our new processes, our new definitions of good, and new software to drive these circular supply chains. All right, here's the final look. That's looking pretty predictable, but as we can see, we've got some work ahead of us. So if I dramatically oversimplify the circular economy, I mean like really oversimplify it, I would say this. If every supply chain in the world only allowed in secondary or regenerative resources and materials, we'd be in a circular economy. It's done. It's over. In my mind, it really comes down to supply chain professionals. Now, of course, there's a lot of material science. There's design that needs to happen. We need to rethink our economic system. There's a lot more work that needs to do, but we play a tremendously valuable role in this transition, which will allow us to continue to use materials to fuel our global economy so that our economies can grow and the people in them can have better lives. So please read up about this. I think it's a really important topic. And we are not as present as we should be. As I go to circular economy communities and meetings and forums, there are not very many supply chain people. And I'm shocked by this. There's millions of us around the world. And for the most part, we haven't been read in on this. So I ask the different sustainability leaders who may be at these conferences, and I ask, have you asked your supply chain about this? And they say, my who? And so we need to invite ourselves to the party here. One way you can do this, we've got a circular supply chain network. You can come and join us. We have live events twice a month and sometimes some special ones. 2 different time zone options there. You can find us at circularsupplychain.network, or tomorrow, 1 hour earlier than this time, which is a very early time for me, but it's my favorite topic. You can join a panel. In this panel, I'm so excited about. The panelists are really tremendous. We're going to explore if circular economy is a solution for a sustainable future. Spoiler alert, yes. Very last question for you. And this is going to be a word cloud. So hopefully you're still here with us and you're going to do a takeaway from this presentation. This will close us out and you can go on with the rest of the conference. Have a think about, one word takeaway. I think you might get 3 chances to vote there of what you took away. I'll be very interested to see what you come up with. Oh, I like this. Thank you, brave person, for going first and to say hope. I am very hopeful about the future. I think if supply chain professionals can hop in here, we're going to be in a good position to dramatically shift how the economy is working. I think these are problems we can solve. I often tell people, if you go and tell your supply chain that they have a year to be totally secondary sourced, they could do it. We have the skill set to do it. We have the framework to do it. We have the ideas to do it. We have the know-how to do it. But we're not being asked the right question and given the right chance to do this. And so I think what I don't want to have happen is 5 to 10 years from now, maybe 7 years from now, we look up and we go, oh my gosh, we're in a circular economy. We're not ready because you've officially been informed this is coming. I don't know if it's going to be called a circular economy, but we're certainly going to have to switch to something because, as you saw, we have less than 50 years left of a lot of really important materials. All right, this is getting quite interesting. So we have collaboration, which is very good. We have exciting, which is excellent to see. Informative, which is very useful. Maybe SAPICS will invite me back next year again. Quite cool. All right, so that takes us to the end. I think we have 4 minutes left, so I'll ask Colin if we're going to do questions or if we're going to give you a little bit of extra time so you can get to your next session. But thank you very much for coming. Thank you for playing along and being participative. It was lovely to spend this time with you.
Don't go yet, Deborah. If you'll open the discussion tab on your right, there is a question, quite a lengthy question that has been asked.
I cannot see you anymore.
Okay, but never mind that. Can you hear me? Hello, Deborah.
Hi, Deborah. I think Colin just lost a connection.
Oh dear, it does look like, have we lost
Colin
Deborah?
can take over again.
Perfect.
Okay. Deborah, if you have a look, if you open the discussion tab on the right, you'll see that there is a question that's been asked.
Elaine, shall I run through the questions that are here?
Yes, well, I only saw one. Oh, there's now more than one. The first one is a very lengthy one from Michael. Perhaps you'd like to just read it out. He was first, so I think he gets first go.
All right, I can't hear Elaine or Colin, but hopefully you can all hear me. So I'm going to read the discussion questions over here from the Q&A. I see in the audience section. I'll take them backwards. Trying to think of how the input components to pharmaceutical companies can be thought of in the circular environment. Yes, this is actually a really interesting and tough one. I think the best, and for context, the active pharmaceutical ingredients that we put into pharmaceuticals is extremely dirty. China makes 90% of the world's APIs. India makes the remaining 5% because it's actually super dirty for the environment. So I probably wouldn't start with just the API, but everything around it we could start to work on. There's a company in the United States called Stryker with a Y, and they're actually looking at how to make reusable components of, let's say, vaccines and vials and the different elements needed in healthcare. I just met with a woman last week, actually, who specializes in taking hospitals towards a circular operation. So I don't have a great answer for you. I think there's elements of, heat, water usage, all the consumables that goes in. APIs are a tough one to try to tackle. So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for you on that one. Okay, then we have one about the African continent. Looks more what the current global supply chain structure continues to be an African traditional supplying raw materials and value. Recycle waste for recycling shipped around the world. Yes, we do it too. China's starting to say no to everybody. With such a structure, would there be any chance that shift so that we're not only collecting waste but recycling it? Yes, also a very good one. So something we didn't talk about today is the different options we have in a circular economy. Recycling is actually the very last loop. It's like the loop of last resort. We first want to use, reuse, repair, upscale, upcycle, remanufacture, and ultimately we can recycle. Recycling takes a lot of energy and reduces the material integrity, so we try to avoid that. However, your point still stands. So how do we harvest and use locally? A lot of this is down to what's called a MRF for the kind of multi-facility for resource, essentially recycling centers, but in America we call them MRFs. And so how can we use this type of an infrastructure to reuse? And something I'm so delighted about is in an area of California, AB InBev just announced that they're going to start reusing the glass bottles for beer, which of course parts of Europe have been doing forever. We used to do in the United States with milk bottles, for example, and we stopped doing it. So I think there's an element of reuse, and we can start to build our infrastructure for that first. But you're thinking absolutely the right way. We shouldn't be shipping our trash around the world. It's a symptom of the linear economy. But I'm going to stop. It is 1:15. For me, it's 5:15. For you, I think it's 3:15. Thank you again for having me. This has just been lovely.
Okay. Deborah, on behalf of SAPEX, thank you very much for a very thought-provoking and interesting presentation. And we hope we'll see you again one day. And for the audience, please remember to complete the poll. On the right, you'll find there's a tab marked polls. Just go in there and please rate this presentation. Thank you very much.